Welcome to Monday, and welcome to the program. Mike Farwell on his way to Flint, Michigan. Go Rangers, go. So you got me today as Mike travels with the team, and what a weekend, huh? What a weekend for the Kitchener Rangers in the playoffs. I mean, that's what you want, right? 2-0. You don't want to split at home in the opening round. And, if you split, even if you split on the road, you got a pretty good shot. And, of course, or just win it. Just win the next two games in Flint and be done. Move on to the next round. But nevertheless, that's where Mike Farwell is today. So you got me today. And I think, barring any unforeseen circumstances, Friday as well. Because of the travel times with the Rangers and of course, Mike, the voice of the Rangers as well, of the Mike Farwell show. But nevertheless, we got lots to talk about today. We want to include you where possible, so feel free to get in touch with the program anytime you like. Of course, in the noon hour, it's all you, as we do every day, the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. So that'll be all you. But in between, if we got spaces for you to chime in on the various topics today, please join in. It's week 2 of the Canadian election. It feels longer already, and I don't know. I don't think it's really because we just had an election in Ontario that we as Ontarians are burnt out on elections. I think I tried to figure out why, because on March the 23rd, the writ was dropped. That was the Sunday. And like a week ago. And then the next day, Monday afternoon around 2 o'clock, I was feeling burnt out on the election campaign. I mean, it was like 24 hours and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is still. And I think it's just a burnout on politics, because politics is so, well, it's divisive. Yes, we know that. But it's so pervasive in our everyday now. And you blame a lot of that on Donald Trump, of course. But, of course, with the change in leadership and everything going on here, in anticipation of what would have been a hard date October election anyway, that everything just got moved up for various reasons and various things. It just seems that I'm burnt out on politics, not necessarily the election. Anyway, we have a political science professor who's going to join us in about half an hour here, and we're going to talk about the campaign election burnout. And by the way, a Canadian election, I looked into this. It's not that I know it off the top of my head, but a Canadian election campaign has to be a minimum of 37 days and a maximum of 51. And it's Carney's writ to drop. It's the Prime Minister's writ to drop. That's how our system works. So it probably had Parliament resumed on the 24th and there was a non-confidence, and then there would have been a writ there, blah, blah, blah. That could have happened that way. It didn't. In anticipation of that, I guess, Mark Carney asked for the writ to be dropped on the 23rd, the Sunday. If you count the days between the 23rd and Election Day, the 28th of April, it's 37 days. In other words, he picked the minimum. And you know why? The minimum is chosen less time for things to go wrong. I really think that was it. I mean, the Liberals and Mr. Carney are enjoying a spike in the polls right now. Less time to... Let's say that there was an on-conference motion and it didn't pass somehow. Because I've thought of that scenario too, where if there was an on-conference motion, why would the NDP vote for it on the 24th of March? Because the NDP is looking at the polls going, man, we're having a hard time right now. So they would look and say, why don't we try and limp this parliament through to the summer break? Ergo through to the fall, when we'd be near that fixed election date anyway, and maybe our fortunes will change, or maybe not. I mean, this is the chance you take. This is what strategists do. They talk all this out and figure it out. They didn't have that choice on the Monday. to vote for or against propping up a liberal minority government because the writ was dropped on the 23rd. But for the Liberals to be able to say, yeah, let's do this election in the shortest time possible for the campaign, it's 37 days. If you include the 23rd of March and the 28th of April, and people say, well, the 28th of April, Election Day, that's not part of the campaign. It is. There are laws and regulations, especially around media, where you don't run election advertising and things like that on the day of the election, but it's still a campaign day. Candidates can still campaign. They can still call people and offer them rides to the polls, and they can still, call their friends and say, please vote for me, and all this kind of stuff. Technically, even Election Day is a campaign day. So, my point, 37 days, the shortest possible election campaign. And yet, I don't know. I'm feeling burnout. I'm now. I'll go out and vote. I'm not one of these people who go, oh, to heck with it. It's too much of this. They're all the same. All these kind of things you hear. I will, and it's not just because of what I do. In other words, involved in news radio. I will go out. I pay attention to the issues and the candidates, and I will get out and vote. I've never missed a vote, whether it's federal, provincial, or municipal. Haven't missed voting in decades. So I'll do that. It's not a burden on me. It's not that I'm burnt out to the point of I don't want to do this. It's not that much to ask. Just somehow psychologically, there's a burnout on this. And I just want it to be over. And of course, everything this time around is taken on a more than ever a proud Canada vibe, I guess, if you will. If you think about one of the big issues of this election is foreign policy. I mean, when's the last time a candidate won or lost on foreign policy? That's usually at the bottom. I mean, we want our leadership to be on the world stage and make a good showing at the conferences, at the NATOs and the G7s and everything, right? We want somebody we can admire and respect out there. But generally, we're like foreign policy. We got other issues. We got immigration and the economy and healthcare and all the usual things we talk about during an election. But this time it's like, who's the best person to deal with Trump? That's a foreign policy issue. It's pretty incredible. It's pretty incredible if you think about it. But more Canadian moments, and we also have a lot to discuss on the show. I'm going to tell you what we got coming up on the show today. It's the Mike Farwell Show. I'm Larry Fedoruk filling in today. Be back in a moment. Welcome back to the program. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. Hey, did you watch the Junos? I was talking about proud Canadian moments and how our election is all about, Canada strong, Canada proud, never 51, all that kind of stuff. It's really our lives have taken on this we're Canadian kind of moment that we always kind of I think we had within us underneath. It was subtle, it was underlying, but everything, if you're watching on Rogers TV, I'm actually wearing a Canada jacket today, just because I thought, yes, Canada, which I love Canada. I'm born and raised. So I always did, but now it's a thing. And that whole Canada thing came out at the Junos last night. I did not watch it from start to finish. And it's not because it's the Junos, but the days of me watching award shows from start to finish long gone. It's partly me and partly YouTube. It's like any live event. Do I put in the 3 to 4 hours, or do I just catch the highlights and results next day on YouTube? And I kind of do that with the Junos. Plus, Junos, Grammys, American Music Awards. Do you recognize the names of the artists as much as you used to? No. Although last night, Anne Murray, Michael Bublé, Anne Murray. I noticed Jim Cuddy, Blue Rodeo were there. I'm like, okay, these are names that I know. Anne Murray getting a Lifetime Achievement Award. The most shocking thing about that to me was that she didn't have one already. For sure she would have had one, but did not, but got one last night. And Anne Murray, I always share the story, and I'll do it really quickly, but in one iteration of my radio career working on a morning show, Anne Murray came in to guest on the morning show, like for 2.5 hours. So a lot of the times is, downtime when you're playing commercials or music or something, and you're all just sitting in the studio without the microphones on. And it's then that you can tell what a person is really like, because I've interviewed a lot of people, celebrities, and when the microphones and the cameras are on, of course, they're cordial and terrific and lovely people that you want to know. But when the microphones and cameras are off, what are they like? That's when you can really tell. And Anne Murray, just fantastic. What a just a wonderful human being. Can't say enough about her. Always, that just reinforced everything I thought about Anne Murray, is having to just kind of sit and make small talk with her. Always remember that. And so when I saw her last night and saw that she got an achievement award, I was like, yeah, good for you. Always admire her, still do. James, welcome to the program. You're on 570 News Radio. Go ahead.
Hi there. I'm kind of thinking that this might be an election issue. Prior to the election, there was a promise by the government to give out a one-time lump sum increase on old age security and increase the Canada pension plan. And this did not occur with this particular payment. I wonder, is this something to do with the election having been called and that amount of money being considered some sort of a bribe, if you like?
Might be. James, that's a great question. The only thing I would add to that, because I don't know the exact answer, however, there are certain things that the government and the Prime Minister and the cabinet, what have you, can do without having Parliament in session, and there's certain things they cannot. I would think something like that is one of those that has to go through a vote in the House of Commons, which of course Parliament did not resume. So maybe that, and that's a maybe. I'm not saying that's for sure, but that could be part of it.
Yeah, the only reason I think that might not be the case is that this was pre-announced quite some time ago, and all the mechanism to put it in place and for CRA to announce that was going to take place on March 27th. My gosh, they would have had to vote on this quite some time ago. So kind of thinking that there's some rule that says, whoops, we're in election mode. You can't hand out money at this point.
James, thanks for the call, man. I got to move on. But I'm thinking you're right on that part. I'm thinking for sure you're right on that part, that this is, you couldn't do things like that during an election campaign, even though there's things you can do as a government, because you still have to govern. In other words, and we know this, right? Because when Mr. Carney has to take time off the campaign, he becomes the prime minister again. During the campaign, he's called the leader of the Liberal Party. The rest of the time, he's called the prime minister if he has to take days off to do prime ministerial things, because the government still has to run and rule and do things like make a phone call to the president of the United States and so forth. So there is that. But as far as something like that, I think two things. I think it might have had to gone through a vote, which Parliament is not in session, so that negates that. And two, you couldn't do something like that during just what you said, James. You couldn't do it during a campaign because it's a bribe. Anyway, we do have a lot of show here, and I was going to tell you all about it, but we'll do that right after this short break. This is 570 News Radio. I'm Larry Fedoruk, in for Mike Farwell today. Mike is back tomorrow. The show today is packed, jam-packed. We got lots to talk about, and I hope you can stick around for it. Beverly Martin is going to join us in about 5 or 6 minutes. She is marketing coordinator with Kitchener-Waterloo Stratford Perth Humane Society. Got a lot of pets up for adoption, a huge number of pets. Why is that? And how do we get these pets into homes? So we're going to be talking about that. At 9:45 this morning, Julie Kalbfleisch is going to join us. Kalbfleisch, I believe. Director of Communications for Sanguine Health center. And we've been talking about this since Friday, and certainly on the weekend, you've heard a lot about it. And this morning on 570 News Radio, about the injunction on Friday, Ontario judge saying that these consumption treatment centers can remain open. And that's great. The judge says so, but the government still says no funding. So a lot of these centers, I think the one on Duke is going to be open today, and then that's it. There's no funding unless miracles happen, So we're going to talk to Sanguine Health Center about that coming up at about 9:45 this morning. At 10 o'clock, what I talked about before, election burnout. Not just that, but we're going to talk about the election, the possible burnout, the second week of the campaign, Trump fueling a lot of the rhetoric in our campaign this time around. Is that foreign interference? It is, really, if you think about it. It's open foreign interference into our election. Dr. Julie Simmons is going to join us, professor of political science at University of Guelph. That's coming up at 10 o'clock this morning. At 10:30, and I'm looking forward to this too, Chef D is going to join us. Daryl Fletcher, better known as Chef D. He has just been appointed president of KWO Oktoberfest. Mark your calendar. Oktoberfest starts September 26th, the 57th annual. So how many sleeps is that for the next Oktoberfest? Anyway, he's been VP. He's been involved with October, so he's not, sort of new to the whole thing. He's been around, knows what he's doing, but he's now president of the board for KW Oktoberfest, so that's cool. It's Monday. This is my first time doing this since Mike Farwell kind of initiated the feature called This Week in Music History. I filled in for Mike before and on a Monday before, but this is the first time I get to talk to Brian Allison, musicologist, and his Facebook page is called This Week in Music History, and the feature is called This Week in Music History. It comes up at 11 o'clock, and we got a lot to talk about there about, what it says, what happened on This Week in Music History, some events and birthdays. And I'm going to tease one. Well, I'll tell you one of them right now. Back in 1949, they brought out the first 45 RPM record. There's a lot of demographic out there now. A lot of people saying, I don't even know what you're talking about. What is a 45 RPM record? I get that, but it came out, I think it was April 1st, 1949. So we'll talk about This Week in Music History, and then we have Drewe's Views with David Drewe of Negotiating Change, his regular Monday feature at 11:30, and he's got a lot to talk about there. And then at 12 o'clock, it's the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. That's our show, and we'll kick it off in earnest in just a moment here on 570 News Radio. Welcome back to the program. Coming up in about 10, 15 minutes here, we're going to talk to Sanguine Health Center a little bit more about the issue of the special injunction, judge's decision on Friday, and how that will have little effect on actual centers being open because of funding, and more about that general issue of consumption treatment centers coming up in about 10 minutes. Right now on the program, there is a large overflow of pets that are up for adoption at the Kitchener-Waterloo Stratford Perth Humane Society. And their marketing coordinator is Beverly Martin, who joins us now. Good morning, Beverly.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on about this. What is the number that we're looking at? Is it a large number, and how did we get to that number?
Yeah, we have 127 animals in our care at the moment. Currently, we have about 40 of them up for adoption. They are ready to go. There's a number of reasons how a lot of these animals come into our care. A lot being surrendered or found as strays. Many different reasons they end up with us.
What are some of those reasons? I'm thinking is the economy, is inflation part of it? Just the cost of keeping a pet. Some people are finding out the hard way. Whoops.
Yeah, we can assume there's the cost of living has impacted so many people in so many ways, and adopting is a big commitment. Having a pet is a big commitment. It's an added cost each month. We are seeing less adoptions this year currently. So, for example, last year, the first couple of months, we saw 242 adoptions. Compared to this January and February, we saw 181. So the difference of 61 adoptions happening. So we can understand that there are many different barriers of people needing to adopt or not wanting to adopt. Financial concern is a big one. The cost of living is going up. So we can assume that pets are being impacted as well.
By the way, it's a good time to mention that you actually have a pet food bank for people who are maybe finding it a little difficult to keep the pet fed every day.
Yeah, absolutely. We are big advocates of keeping people and pets together if that's possible. So we do offer a pet pantry as our food bank for pets. It runs from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. in Kitchener and 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. in Stratford every Friday. So this is a free, no-cost program. You can come, and if it's a matter of getting a bag of food each month to keep you and your pet together, we're happy to provide that for you during financial challenges. And our pet pantry fed over 8,600 pets in the community last year alone. And we're seeing these numbers rise. So there is a clear need in our community.
You said, I think 127 was the number, and 40 that are up for adoption?
Yeah, and more coming up for adoption every day. So that number is going to increase. So if you are interested in getting an animal and are unsure, please just come and ask questions. We're happy to help along the way. We're very transparent on any medical needs of any animals that we do have. So if that is a factor or a concern, we're happy to chat about that and what that means for the family, so they can make the best informed decision for them and the animal.
Sure. Yeah, I'm kind of curious, and maybe this is getting too deep into the weeds here, but if you have only 40 of those up for adoption, are the others kind of in the process of? Because I imagine you don't just get a pet and then adopt it out. You have to do all the checks and everything.
Yeah, there's a number of different reasons why that number, the number in our care is higher than the ones that we have up for adoption. So one being some animals do need some medical care. So we make sure that they are in the healthiest state that they can be in for adoption. Some of our animals are going through some training just to make sure that they know the basics going into homes. And some are in stray hold. So some may be in our care, but they are waiting for their family to come pick them up. It could look like a different reasons.
I think pet owners should go through training as well, but that's a different topic, maybe for another time. And that's
also part of families that are wanting to adopt, and maybe understanding that it maybe just needs some training for that animal to stay in the home. And we do offer dog training at our center as well.
What kind of pets are we talking about here? Are we people think I'm sure of dogs and cats, but is that it?
No, absolutely not. We have Turtle. We have Yertle the turtle, and she's actually been with us for, I believe she may be our longest resident at the moment. She's been with us since September. She is a red-eared slider turtle. So they are very common pets, but they are unfortunately also commonly put back into the wild, which is a no-go. Please do not do that. Turtles are a long-term commitment pet. So she can have a life up to 20 years at least. So we do have a turtle, we have a snake, sable, and we have lots of bunnies and guinea pigs as well. And of course, cats and dogs.
There we go, in that 40. All right. There's a woman in my building who has a turtle.
Yeah.
And she, in the summertime, she'll take it out and put it on the lawn and she supervises it, and it crawls around for half an hour or whatever. And I'm sure she has an aquarium or whatever you would call it that she puts it back in. But it's always interesting because we always joke with her. I see you're out walking your turtle, and we all laugh about it all the time. And it's interesting. As soon as you mentioned turtle as a pet, I'm like, yeah, people do have those for sure.
People have a wide range of animals in their homes. That's for sure.
How do people contact you for these pets, or for the pet pantry food bank, or any of what we just talked about?
Yeah, if you want any information at all, it all can be found on our website at kwsphumane.ca. And you can find all information. If you have specific questions, you can also email us at info@kwsphumane.ca. We are having an adopt-a-thon this upcoming weekend. So if you have been thinking about adopting, we have a spring shelter adoption event Saturday and Sunday. Who are interested and have the capacity to do so to bring home an animal. Our adult dog fees will be reduced by $100. So just to help them spring them from the shelter. We love a play on words here at the Humane Society. So again, if anybody who is seriously considering taking home a dog or a pet, come and visit us. We'd be happy to help them find their forever.
It can make such a difference to a home and a family, a pet.
It really does. Yeah.
A great pet. So all the best to you. Thank you for your time today, Beverly.
Thank you as well. You as well. Have a great day.
You too. Beverly Martin is marketing coordinator for the Kitchener-Waterloo Stratford Perth Humane Society. This is 570 News Radio. Back in a moment. Welcome back to the program. I'm Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell today. Mike will be back on the show the rest of this week. I think I'm back on Friday as well because of the travel times of the Rangers. And again, go Rangers, go. You've been hearing this story certainly over the weekend since Friday when an Ontario judge issued an injunction on basically a Ford government bill or policy saying that several safe injection sites, as they're called, but their safe consumption sites that were supposed to be closed could in fact remain open. So that seemed like good news, but as you've been hearing, it is not that simple at all because of funding. Director of Communications for Sanguine Health Center is Julie Caldflesh, who's joining us now. Good morning, Julie.
Good morning, Larry.
Thanks for coming on about this. I mean, it seemed at the outset like good news on Friday, but that doesn't mean everything can just open up because of, was I right, because of funding, basically?
Yeah, there's a few factors at play. I will say it is still good news because it is a judge that's recognizing that there are potential harms that will come, and we believe very real and serious harms that will come from closing these sites. So that is a glimmer of hope in what's been a really difficult few months. But unfortunately for us, and I would imagine for other consumption and treatment services sites, we've been working towards this deadline of April 1st. So today will be our last day of operation at 150 Duke. The reason for that in part is because along with the site, the actual location, there's a lot of components to operating a supervised consumption site. And one is that you need a federal exemption. And our exemption runs out as of midnight tonight. And then the other piece that's critically important is that we need funding. And the province has, their funding is now done as of today. So at this point, we will continue with the plan to close our operation and wait and see what happens with this court injunction and what happens next.
The federal exemption, it's an exemption from what exactly? Can you tell us?
Yeah, it's through the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. So it essentially allows us to have controlled substances on site. Right. In order to be able to operate. So the exemption is tied to the address, 150 Duke. And so I will be honest, I don't know all of the ins and outs of getting another exemption if we were to find a new location. However, I did go through this back in 2018 when we opened the site. I was working with public health, and there's quite a rigorous process involved, as I'm sure you can imagine, in getting that exemption.
And funding, there's no provincial government funding. Is there any other funding that comes to you in any other manner?
Yeah, we do have, we relied mostly on the provincial funding when the site opened. So 1.5 million. We are putting together a plan for a drop-in space that will have all the services that we currently offer at the CTS, with the exception of consumption services. We are getting some funding support from the region and public health, and we will have support from other agencies as well. There are a lot of different places that the funding comes in. But right now I can tell you we've spent many months trying to put together a drop-in space to continue to support the people we serve. And it's been challenging. We do not have the same budget resources that we had when we opened the CTS.
I think there is a lot in a name, and for years we referred to them as safe injection sites, but really and I think it's important to point out, it's a consumption and treatment center. And that word treatment, I think, should be included to give people an idea of what else goes on at these centers.
Correct. So when the sites opened back in 2019, we were granted permission to open based on a rigorous application, which included extensive wraparound services. So our site is a health care center. Folks can go in to consume their substances, but we also have nurses on site. We have primary care. We provide wound care to folks. We provide a safe space for people to come in from the outdoors. We have connections to counseling, housing, all the social supports that folks may need. And we're just there essentially to meet folks where they're at and provide them with what they need. Some days that's a granola bar, and other days it's a whole suite of services.
So again, the judge presented a better view of what happens at your place and others like them in Ontario. Your Duke is open today, and then that's it. And then from there on, as you said, you're going to do the best you can to find out what happens next. It's not the end necessarily, the big end.
It's not the end at all for Sanguine. I mean, we have some major concerns about what this means for folks who use substances. It's incredibly dangerous, and tomorrow will be a scary day for those of us who serve folks in this community and those who have loved ones or they themselves use substances. So we are concerned about that. But no, it's not the end in terms of the other services we provide, our van, our community outreach, our mobile clinic. There's all kinds of services that we'll continue to provide. We'll also be a service provider through the new heart hubs, providing primary care once that's up and running.
Julie, thank you for clearing a lot of this up for us, and all the best. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Larry.
Julie Kalbfleisch is Director of Communications for Sanguine Health Center. This is 570 News Radio. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. More in a moment. I'm Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. Here's Frank. Frank is calling the show. Go ahead, Frank. You're on 570 News Radio.
Oh, thanks for taking my call. I would like to make some indications of observations, because the soup kitchen is right across the street, and being a senior, I use that services. So I'm walking past this, I call self-service junkie centers, and things that disturb me. I see cabs coming and leaving, bringing participants as well as workers. There is a child's playground exactly 1 block away, up between the same street and Weaver, where they're out playing. I've seen drug sales going on in the soup kitchen because I could see the secret handoffs going on. The people that are calling up and saying they have lost funding, it's because they're not getting tax money from the government. And since they're nonprofit, this means of income is now being taken from these people, and the workers there are now unemployed, and I'm saying they're part of the homeless industry. and it's not as clean and as pretty as there. I've noticed people passed out on the floor at the soup kitchen, faces down on tables. And the peoples that work there missing Thursdays and Fridays as employed workers from funding, taking Thursdays and Fridays and Mondays off to get paid long weekends. It's part of the homeless industry, and it's not as pretty. Or these people don't work that are there. They don't want to get off drugs. They have no goals, dreams, or ambitions, and they're all on some sort of welfare. They're not taking off work to come over there to shoot up. Thank you for taking my call.
All right, Frank, thank you for calling, man. That's some great insights. And the only exception I would take, Frank, is the word all that you used. They are all this. They are all that. I don't know if they're all. But I think you accurately painted a pretty good picture of the problems facing a battling addiction, trying to A, help people with addiction, and B, making sure they don't die. I mentioned the name, safe injection sites. That's so people don't die. That's not a treatment center. What Sanguine and others are trying to do are consumption and treatment centers. That's what they're called. Which of course does require a lot of staff, a lot of funding. As far as people that work at the centers, I mean, Sanguine Health has, other services and things they provide. So people who work more or less with some of the addiction issues, not necessarily unemployed because of that. But anyway, Frank, just some great insights there. Appreciate it. Are you suffering from election burnout? We'll talk with a political science professor next here on 570 News Radio. Welcome back to the program. Coming up in the next half hour, Chef D is going to join us. Chef D is now the new president of KW Oktoberfest. Mark that date, September 26th. That's when it kicks off, the 57th annual Oktoberfest, with the new chairman of the board, if you will, Chef D. He's going to join us to talk about a little bit about that just after 10:30. Right now on the program, here we are, week 2 of the campaign. It feels longer already, of the federal campaign. Is there election burnout? This is a campaign like no other. Here to talk about that and all the rest, professor in political science at University Guelph, Dr. Julie Simmons, is joining us. Hello, Dr. Simmons.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm good. I'm burnt out, but other than that, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm great, actually. It's exciting to have had back-to-back provincial and federal elections and a leadership race. It's been a term like no other at university in political science courses.
I can imagine that would be the class to take, or to at least to audit, to keep track. Now, I did admit earlier, and this is true, that when the writ was dropped on the 23rd of March, about 24 hours later, I felt a little burnout. And I don't think it's because I'm an Ontarian and just went through an election. I'm thinking it's politics in general. It's for the things you mentioned and more. Just everything is at the fore.
Well, we've also been witnessing politics south of the border, with the American election in the fall as well, and then sort of the barrage of messaging that we get from south of the border that is certainly making our news, but also American channels as well. So you're right. I mean, there's a lot that's gone on in Ontario in the last couple of months with the provincial election as well, but I think it's definitely been a heavy 8 months for politics in North America.
And an interesting, as you mentioned, because one of our big issues this time is who's the best to deal with Donald Trump. In other words, foreign policy is almost at the top of the list of a federal election. That's rare to me.
It is rare. And I can think back to when I was a child and, Brian Mulroney and John Turner were duking it out on the same issue with John Turner, the Liberal, saying that Brian Mulroney was letting Canadians down by negotiating a free trade agreement with the United States. And Brian Mulroney saying, I'm negotiating the free trade agreement with the United States because I want to make things better for Canadians. And now we've had a generation of living under free trade agreements across the globe. And so it's very destabilizing to have these tariffs put in place by the United States.
What do you make of the turn that we've seen in Liberal fortunes from being 25 points behind to latest polls say maybe even 5 points ahead of the Conservatives?
Well, it's quite remarkable on the one hand, because it is such a leap, but it also helps us understand that maybe Canadians' concern was not so much with the Liberal Party per se, but with Justin Trudeau, the leader, because once he resigned as leader, that's when we begin to see the uptick in popularity for the Liberal Party, which I think was a little bit ahead of the, discussion of tariffs that happened south of the border. So now we have this kind of blueprint from the Ontario election, where if you make the election about that issue, it certainly served Doug Ford well at the polls. And so now Ontarians and Canadians are thinking about who can best represent their interests in those international negotiations. And it seems like a lot of Canadians are in favor of Mark Carney taking on that role, or at least they have a little bit more trust in him, if I'm reading the polls correctly.
It seems so, but again, we're not talking about immigration or healthcare or the economy, yes, but the economy vis-a-vis the tariffs and trade. But we're not talking about the other things we normally would be talking about, or at least not as much.
Absolutely. It's a generational election in the sense that we're not talking about the issues that matter to Canadians traditionally on a day-to-day basis, like healthcare, the cost of groceries, whether their kids can afford a home, whether they can afford a home, whether their parents are able to live on old age security as seniors. And those issues are not really front and center in this election. There are announcements made on a daily basis by Carney as well, and by Poilievre and the other leaders as to what they would do on a variety of different issues, not just supporting people who might lose their positions because of the trade wars, or even how they would negotiate with Donald Trump and so on. But those kinds of issues have yet to get a lot of traction. So just as an illustration, I read this morning that Pierre Poilievre said during the campaign that he was going to offer a tax cut to seniors. And I didn't even know he had said that. So,
right.
I hadn't come across it yet. And it's interesting that we are really just, that one issue seems to be sucking up a lot of the bandwidth.
I'm going to ask you for a prediction. What do you think the turnout will be like? It's been horribly low in Ontario's last two elections. Federally, we usually get about 60% to 2/3 approximately of a turnout. Do you think all of this will get people out to vote, or are people burnt out and just don't want to deal with it, stay home, whatever?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's one that's difficult to answer. We had a provincial election where we did have this galvanizing issue and a lot of unity around, fighting the United States in a rhetorical sense more than a physical sense, of course, but that was the focus of that election. And one would have thought that would translate into a higher voter turnout in the provincial election. And while there was a slight increase, it wasn't particularly noteworthy. And so if we use that as our compass for this federal election, then we wouldn't expect there to be a higher voter turnout. On the other hand, because it is such a single focused election, and it's not a domestic issue that's really driving the narratives of the parties, we would expect potentially that there would be more voter turnout. But if Ontario is the kind of indicator, we shouldn't expect it. So it'll be interesting to see on election day.
And lastly, I only have a few seconds here, but debates, will they make a difference? Well, there's the French and an English. Will the debate make any difference?
I think the debate will make a difference to voters who turn on their TV on a regular basis for news. I think that the percentage of people that do that these days is very low. You might get some clips from the debate, some sound bites that make it into people's social media feeds one way or another. But it's a different kind of politics these days, with a whole generation of people not really looking to the television for news.
Absolutely. And that's, boy, I could do a whole show on that. But for now, very interesting and informative. Dr. Simmons, thank you so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Dr. Julie Simmons, professor in political science, University of Guelph. How do you feel about the upcoming Canada votes? I got a couple of thoughts on some of the slogans and things. We'll pick this up in a moment. This is 570 News Radio.
It's quite remarkable on the one hand because it is such a leap, but it also helps us understand that maybe Canadians' concern was not so much with the Liberal Party per se, but with Justin Trudeau, the leader, because once he resigned as leader, that's when we begin to see the uptick in popularity for the Liberal Party, which I think was a little bit ahead of the discussion of tariffs that happened south of the border.
That's a good assessment. That's Dr. Julie Simmons, political science professor at the University of Guelph, our guest only moments ago. I'm Larry Fedoruk, in for Mike Farwell, talking about Canada Votes 2025 and the election. And we started talking with Dr. Simmons about burnout, feeling a little burnout. I think for me, and I think for most, the burnout is on politics. As a person, and Julie mentioned the people who tune on the TV and the radio for news and news about politics. I'm one of those people. And it's always been an interest of mine, aside from being involved in news radio. And so I'm feeling burnt out on the information. And a lot of that is because of Donald Trump. And I mean, one of the stories today is that Trump is figuring out a way to seek a third term. Like, why is that a story? Well, and I'm not being critical. Because that is a story and we'd want to hear about it. But just to give you an example, that's sucking up some of the oxygen right in the middle of a Canadian election. It just is. There was stories out of France today about politics. I mean, it's politics is just at this fevered pitch around the world for this last decade, to a point where this is the election of a decade, of a generation. And it's interesting. I will always be somewhat mystified. And again, people are going to say, I know, because I've had this already when I'm filling in here and people right away go, oh, you love Trudeau, you love Trudeau. And it's not that. I've been critical of things he's said and done. But I don't understand the vitriol. I really don't understand the whole F Trudeau thing. That's just, and suddenly just to be, I mean, I know it's politics and it's dirty, but suddenly you're out. You had 10 years. You took that party from nothing to 3 governments, almost a decade of power. And were you expecting a thank you? Because instead of a thank you, you're fired. You got to get out. And he should have known. I think he did know it. I think he was hanging on despite himself. And I wouldn't underestimate him in that. I think had it not been for Chrystia Freeland's very public show of non-confidence and her resignations, he might have hung on. He might have hung on. Like the point where he resigned, and the leadership conference where Carney was anointed, what was that, 2 to 3 weeks? I think his stock went up. He was on the world stage. He was on the world stage battling for Canada's economy against tariffs. I think his personal poll, I don't have this specifically, but I think his personal poll numbers would have gone up. Who knows? He could have hung on till the fall. Now, I think it was the right thing. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it wasn't just the F. Trudeau conservatives. There was factions within his own party long before Freeland resigned for a year. My own MP wrote an op-ed piece with another MP about asking Trudeau to move on. Maybe it's just at a point of leadership. There's not a lot of leaders that have gone longer than a decade, and certainly not as prime minister. Chrétien, Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, Mulroney was just over 8 years. That's kind of the recent history. There's not a lot of leaders and prime ministers that go much longer than that. So it's probably just time. And but who knows? I mean, who knows? I just don't understand how you could disagree with his policies, but I think it was a job pretty well done for 10 years. And it's, I guess, time for a change, whether it's Carney and the Liberals again, or the Liberals under a new leader, or whether it's Poilievre and the Conservatives. I don't know. We shall see. Polls are polls, but then there's April 28th, right? And one of the things you don't hear as much anymore is Never 51. You know why that is? Never 51 is a negative statement. And I agree we'll never be 51. And I would wear the T-shirt if I had one. But Never 51 is a statement about something we won't do. We won't be the 51st state. The positive statement is Canada strong or always Canada. Do you see what I mean? That's a positive statement. That's concentrating on things we should do, not something we'll never be. And that's why I think Never 51 is kind of fading in the background. More on this and your thoughts in a moment after a short break on 570 News Radio. Larry Fedorkin from Mike Farwell. Mike's back tomorrow talking about the election. April 28th. I don't know if you heard, there's an election. Canadian election. Only really, six months or so before we were going to have one anyway. There was the hard fixed election date in October. And my theory earlier, and I can see a lot of reasons, I can see a lot of flaws in my theory, but I did have this theory of perhaps taking a chance, or when the new leader is anointed, Mark Carney, and becomes prime minister because of our parliamentary system, that he and others cut a deal with the NDP, because the NDP's fortunes are just not good right now, federally, and somehow limp through a non-confidence motion when Parliament resumed on the 24th of March, which we knew was coming. If they could get that and limp the government through to summer break, ergo the fall session, when we'd be closer, would that have been better? It might have helped the NDP. I don't know that it would have helped anybody else. It might have hurt the NDP even more so. They are suffering a backlash right now, that the backlash that the Liberals got, I think the NDP are getting federally for supporting the Liberals for the number of times in months and years they did. So what happens? I don't know, on April 28th. I don't want to make a hard prediction because I don't know enough, but one prediction I will make is I think it's going to be a minority government for one side or the other. And on one side, and you can figure out what I'm saying here without me showing favorites, on one side, I don't think a minority government lasts. On the other side, I think it does. And if Carney somehow loses this election, does he stay on as leader? I don't think he has to win to stay on as leader. I think he has to just do well. Because if he loses, that other minority government may not last, and you want to go through another leadership race, and who have you got there to run in it? Chrystia Freeland's out. I mean, she's no longer leadership material. I mean, I loved her. I do respect her, but I don't think she's leadership material anymore. So what's, all these different scenarios after April the 28th? We shall see. And the rest of the world keeps turning at an incredible rate. So we've got to do something. Get out and vote, I guess, is the last thing I'll say on that. Chef D is now the new president of the KW Oktoberfest. We'll talk to him next at 570 News Radio. It's Monday on the Mike Farwell Show, so you know that at 11 o'clock we'll have This Week in Music History with musicologist Brian Allison. And I'll tell you, he sends some notes beforehand, and I looked at the notes, and it's pretty good stuff lined up for This Week in Music History. Some great historical events, if you will. And we'll do that at 11 o'clock. 11:30, it's Drewe's Views with David Drewe of Negotiating Change. He's got some interesting topics online as well. On tap, I should say. So we'll do that in our 11 o'clock hour. Right now, congratulations in order to our guest, Chef D of Chef D Catering and Events, Daryl Fletcher. He is now the new president of the board, chairman of the board, if you will, of KW Oktoberfest. Here is Chef D. How are you, Chef?
I'm very well, Larry. How are you?
I'm good. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very excited. This is I get to be the president of the biggest party in the region.
I guess so. I've marked the date, Friday, September 26th. My birthday, by the way.
Okay, well, we can have a double whammy then.
There you go. So the dates are already on for the next Oktoberfest, September 26th, 57th annual. Yep. I don't know how many sleeps that is, but it's coming up in the fall.
It will get here faster than we know, and I know our festival and partners are getting all ready, and tickets will be released in the middle of May. So it's going to be an exciting time.
Now, people don't know, maybe they don't follow the board, and this is you're not new to the board and everything. You've served for KW Oktoberfest in a literal sense for a time now. Tell us about that.
So yes, I came on the board 2.5 years ago, and my grandparents were involved heavily with Oktoberfest, and it's always been such a big part of our region. I went, this is a really good and kind of fits into, as Chef D, as our catering company and everything like that kind of fits into it. And I just went, this is a really good partnership. I really want to help this grow. And our past president, Alan Kyan, walked us through and went through the last 3 years of, an event that was, changing, and we changed some more. And, it's really become such a success. And last year was the feeling and the vibe was fantastic. And I'd like to carry that on. Of course I would. I'd love to carry that on for this year.
I know. And you mentioned in your statement, Alan Cayenne doing a great job. And the first thing I thought of was, I never met a chef who didn't like cayenne. So
just a little, brother, just a little.
I'm sure I'm not the first to make that awful pun, but there you go. Had to do it. Sorry, couldn't stop myself.
It's all good.
Well, talk about your team though. You've got a pretty good team.
We have an amazing team. We have Tracy who heads up our day-to-day operations. She came on board she was with the Waterloo BIA, and it's a year and a half ago that she started, and she's just brought a really fresh energy to the position. People know her, and it just, again, our region, we like kind of keeping things together, and amazing. And then we have our marketing team, our sales team, and they've all gone to bat so many times. And, it's a small but mighty team. And again, the proof is in the pudding. They did such a great job that we actually had a small surplus this year, and that keeps the festivities going.
Now, your involvement in the past and now as president, and you mentioned this, you talked about, changing things within KW Oktoberfest. How about that? Because here you have, as I said, 57th coming up. Yep. You have an event that works. How do you look at what to change, what not to change? Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but still you want to move forward, how do you balance those things?
Well, I think we want to make it more that more people can get to it, with having our Welcome Platz downtown. It's a free event. We have the beer gardens, we have music, we have the traditional German dance, we have traditional German foods. So, you can come and be part of it. And then if you want to take it to the next level, you can go to our fest halls and again, have a great experience there with some great food. Each fest hall has something to offer, something different to offer to the attendees. And I think as we grow it, I think it just, again, keeping it going all year round is very important, especially in this society. Larry, you and I are in the same vintage. And, if you're not out there every day, plugging it, it kind of gets pushed aside. And I think it's very important. We're having the Woman of the Year come up in May. Again, we have different Basstoberfest, which is a fishing derby, which we're doing. We're going to add in a street hockey. Again, just kind of keeping it all and making the festival more inclusive, so that everybody can come out and have a party with us.
KW Oktoberfest is one of the biggest in the world. I mean, people come from far and away.
Mm-hmm.
Even though people have Oktoberfests in other parts of the world, this is the big one. I think that's terrific that you get so many faraway visitors as well.
Exactly. And again, that's what we're working on. We've worked with Metrolinx last year for them to bring the Lederhosen train down from Toronto into our region, which is the first for that. So we, again, baby steps. We're working with them again this year to get more people coming on the train. And again, safe, easy, reliable way to get here.
And you said tickets in May.
Yes. Yep.
I'm a little bit surprised to hear that. I didn't realize they go out that early, but you actually get people in May starting to grab 100%. Them up.
100%. I know our Concordia Club, a huge facility, and they start their tickets early because they know they sell out and that. So again, the Schwaben Club, we have the Alpine Club, the Transylvania Club. We also, again, those clubs, again, this gives them a good start, gets the juices going, as it were, and away we go.
Well, just off Oktoberfest for a second, there's always a new food trend on the horizon or something that gets very popular. As Chef D Catering at Events, is there something you're looking at as a new food trend or a new item that's out there?
Yeah, Larry, that's a really good question right now. Last year, again, it was the pork rejuvenating. And then again, I think this year, the turkey farmers of Ontario are going to help us, and we're going to come up with some new dishes using some amazing turkey product.
Okay, there you go. And that kind of feels, although they probably wouldn't appreciate me saying this, that kind of feels like a fall dish to me when you start thinking about turkey and when you think about Oktoberfest. So
100%,
Yeah. Daryl Fletcher, Chef D, congratulations, and
thank you.
Look forward to many conversations before the events start in the fall. Thank you.
Thanks again, Larry, for having me. Good to see you again, and great to be on your show.
You as well. Chef D, Daryl Fletcher, Chef D Catering and Events, and Chef D, the president of the board of Oktoberfest, KWO Oktoberfest, September 26th to October 18th, 2025. Tickets on sale in May. Back in a moment, 570 News Radio. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell today. Just mentioned we're talking to Chef D, who's now the new president of the board of KWO Oktoberfest, and we mentioned the dates of Oktoberfest, September 26th to October 18th. So that seems far away, but as Chef D said, it's just going to come up real quick. Tomorrow, April 1st, did you know there was some talk of, and I don't know that there's an official group anyway, but there was some talk of canceling April Fool's Day this year. Because, I mean, there's no official governing board to cancel April 1st, April Fool's Day. But, and it was to cancel because life is already crazy enough. We don't need April Fool's. That was kind of the theory. And I was like, yeah, you know what? I buy into that. Although I think it's been virtually canceled the last couple of years. And especially during the Trump years, previous to that, his first administration, we didn't really do a lot on April Fools because it just didn't seem timely or very funny to kind of say, all right, we're going to play practical jokes. Because, think of the headline, Donald Trump to rename Gulf of Mexico Gulf of America. Yeah, fake story. I'm not going to, that's April Fool's. Trump thinking about running for a third term, thereby going against the U.S. Constitution. Yeah, that's got to be an April Fool's joke. Trump wants to take over Greenland. These are all April Fool's type of news stories. And I get that personally people can do April Fool's jokes on their own. It doesn't always have to be news, because there have been some gems of April Fool's. Remember, oh gosh, the one I should have researched this more, but the one I remember once was metric time, that the government was introducing a switch over to metric time, and they reported this on the news. So I think now, especially since even, I guess, before Trump's social media, I guess, where it's just not appropriate for news to be doing April Fool's jokes on their newscast, unless it's so particularly outrageous that it's an obvious joke, and in which case it kind of takes away from the joke part of it. And secondly, it might also be believable according to the times that we live in. But anyway, so tomorrow is April 1st. I think this year we're focused more on April 2nd, which is what Trump calling Liberation Day for the United States, because he's going to drop all these tariffs on everybody worldwide. And there's some thought, as you've been hearing not only on our news, but you've probably been hearing for a day or two, in that Canada might be somewhat spared on some of the tariffs. In other words, we're going to get tariffs, but they may be a little bit less than we expected, or in certain areas, maybe a little smaller percentage than other countries might get. I don't know. He's a very volatile, this is an understatement, very volatile individual. Hard to tell until we get it. I've heard three different pundits say this recently, including two of them were conservatives, American conservative political pundits, who believe, and I believe this to be true, and here we are, by the way, I was complaining moments ago about Trump taking up the oxygen in the news world, right? And here I am talking about him, but nevertheless, that when Trump wakes up in the morning, he has no idea what he's going to do that day. Very little. I mean, there might be a few things on the schedule here and there, but otherwise he kind of decides that day. And that is a scary way to run the world's most powerful economy and a country in charge of the world's most powerful military. That is just, when you put it that way, man, I don't know. Nevertheless, we're going to talk a little bit about election on Drewe's Views. I know that. About the Canadian election, Drewe's Views with David Drewe, coming up just after 11:30, and only about 10 minutes away from This Week in Music History. I mentioned earlier I fill in for Mike Farwell here and there, as you know, and I've done a few Mondays in my time filling in for Mike, but I've never had the chance to do This Week in Music History with Brian Allison. And I'm a big music guy. I'm not a musicologist like Brian, but I'm a big music guy, so I'm looking forward to that. That's coming up in about 10 minutes. More in a moment on the Mike Farwell Show. I'm Larry Fedoruk. This is 570 News Radio. I'm Larry Fedoruk, in for Mike Farwell. I want to mention quickly that Richard Chamberlain would have been 91 today. He passed away on Saturday at age 90. Richard Chamberlain. I am this old. I remember vaguely as a child watching him as Dr. Kildare on television. A very, very, I guess, you can talk about shows like ER and medical dramas that have been going on for years, but this was one of the first ever kind of sensitive, issue-driven medical dramas. Dr. Kildare in New York City, young intern. And And Richard Chamberlain played him. And then he kind of got this title, King of the Miniseries. I think he was in the Thornbirds and a bunch of miniseries. Never really was a movie star. Had the looks and everything to be a movie star, a leading man, but never really kind of made his name in television over the years. And I think I've mentioned this before. Short version of the story is when Betty White died just before her 100th birthday. Do you remember this? Everybody was making a big deal about, oh, I see, you jinxed it. You were planning her parties and the TV specials and everything. And I was like, yeah, because they need planning. I don't think we have the power to kill someone by planning their birthday party. Because if we did, there are people whose birthday parties I'd be planning right now. So when Betty White passed at 99, I started to think, gosh, there's got to be a lot of celebrities out there who are 90 years and older. So I've made, because this is just me, kind of person I am, I made a list. And I keep the list updated. And occasionally someone, I'm pretty sure you couldn't slip one by me. Like, do you have Dabney Coleman? Yes, I had Dabney Coleman, but he passed. He was 92. Like, there isn't, do you have Judd Hirsch? Yes, he just turned 90. Like, do you have Mel Brooks? Of course I have Mel Brooks and Dick Van Dyke. I have this list, and it's morphed into two lists. One is the list of people who lived, famous celebrities in all fields, not just movies and television. Glenn Hall, do you remember Glenn Hall, goaltender, Chicago Blackhawks? He's 93, I think. Marv Levy, Buffalo Bills, 99. Anyway, so all walks of life, but you have to be a sort of known celebrity who are 90 and older. And then people who live to be 90 and older, that list is about 160, 170 people, celebrities. And then the people who are living as 90 and older are I think it's about 140 right now. So it's not bad. A lot of, it's celebration of life, kind of cool, you know. So Richard Chamberlain I had on my list. And I thought about him again because we're doing This Week in Music History coming up in just a few minutes here with Brian Allison. And Richard Chamberlain, though he was known as a television actor, actually had a record out in the 60s when his fame was at its peak with Dr. Kildare. And I actually think it had some hit songs on it they played on the radio. I couldn't name one. I think they had an Elvis song called Love Me Tender. I think he covered that, and they had that as a single for a while. But nevertheless, Richard Chamberlain. You know any Richard Chamberlain songs? No one does. But as an actor, Richard Chamberlain. Anyway, I have my list, and I've posted categories like movies and television before on my Facebook and X accounts. I'm also on Blue Sky. So if you want to see some of those posts, heck, if you want the file, send me a note. I can send you the whole file. It's an interesting little file. But anyway, this week in music history, Brian Allison. That's coming up next here on 570 News Radio. And coming up after 11:30, it's a Monday, so it's Drewe's Views with David Drewe of Negotiating Change, and some great topics he's got on tap today. That's coming up just after 11:30. But right now, and have I been looking forward to this, because though I've filled in for Mike on Monday before, I've never done this segment. The relatively new to the Mark Farwell Show, This Week in Music History, with musicologist Brian Allison. Hey, Brian.
Hello, Larry.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm excellent. You can follow Brian's page on Facebook, by the way. If you search This Week in Music History, Brian is on Facebook.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Do you ever, I just had to ask, do they ever play the theme to Hello, Larry for you?
Sometimes.
Do you remember the TV show Hello, Larry from the late 70s with McLean Stevenson? He was a radio DJ.
He was. Oh, I know. Yeah.
There you go.
I think we only had that, and there was an old hit called Hats Off to Larry.
Oh, right. Yeah. I know the one you're talking about, too. I just wondered.
They used to play that occasionally for me as well. Otherwise, there weren't a lot of Larrys. I always joke growing up, I had Larry Storch and Larry of the Three Stooges were the...
That's great.
Were the heroes that people compared me to. So, I guess not bad. Not bad.
Pretty good company there, Larry.
But speaking of history, though, this week in music history, a name that came up, no relation to Bob Denver because it's not his real name, but John Denver is on your list this week.
He is. This is we're going back to 1974, so March 30th. John Denver, whose real name was Henry John Dusseldorf Jr., changed his name to John Denver, which obviously is a little easier to manage, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
He topped the Billboard 100 for the first time with "Sunshine on My Shoulders," big song in 1974, and it was his first. It was the first of four number ones that he would chart during mostly in the 70s, and he went on to sell a lot of records. He was a big artist in the 70s and one of the most in-demand concert performers throughout most of the 1970s. Died tragically in a plane crash a few years later.
Yeah.
But we pay tribute to John Denver and his first hit single. John was formative in my years. Probably some of the earliest music I can remember my parents listening to as a little guy was some John Denver records.
If you go back and watch clips of his concerts, they are massive crowds. You're right. He was a big star.
Well, he was, and he was kind of the cross. I mean, he crossed all genres. People in pop music liked him. People in country music liked him. He forayed that into an acting career, went on to make a couple of movies. He was constantly on television. Yeah, John Denver was everywhere. He was just sort of the guy of the moment for a period of time there in the mid-'70s.
And someone, I think it might have been the Osmonds, I don't remember the show, but they had a problem with "Sunshine on My Shoulders." "Sunshine makes me high." They didn't like the reference to being high.
Yes, and there was also the Rocky Mountain High song,
right,
of course, which charted big, and a lot of people thought that was a drug reference, which John Denver came out and said, well, it really wasn't a drug reference. I understand why people thought it was, but it was just a reference to me loving where I came from and the Rocky Mountains and just being, sort of impressed by those things. So, yeah, people read into stuff. But, yeah, I think you're right. The Osmonds did have with having a very wholesome family TV show, they didn't kind of want any references that might be taken for drug references on their show. So they had issue with John Denver.
I'm high on life, man. But anyway, I was mentioning earlier that, because I read your notes, on this day was it 1949? There was a momentous introduction of some technology that people may not even know what it is today.
1949 is going back a long way, but it was the introduction. RCA Victor unveiled the 45 single. So before that, people were listening to 78 RPM records or 33.5 RPM albums, an album format. And in 1949, RCA Victor said, a lot of people can't really afford full-length LPs, but they still want to listen to music or they still want to listen to a song. So what if we made like a mini record people could buy that would have one song on one side and one on the other? And of course, this took off. This sort of revolutionized the singles market because it gave people, particularly teenagers and young people, the ability to go out and buy one song that they could listen to without having to commit to, whatever the cost of an album was back then. I'm sure it was only a couple bucks, but when you were a teenager in the 50s, that was a lot of money. So, this is today, literally today in 1949, the first 45 RPM singles were issued and went on to revolutionize the singles market. Now,
things today like
we have downloadable singles, and 45s are more or less collector's items.
45s and the 45 record center that you used to have to buy. Terms like the B-side, these are just foreign terms today a lot of times, but it's a great day in history. And I'm glad you brought that up because it's just great memories for a lot of people. The 45 record.
Many of us who grew up in that era, that's sort of our first memories of buying music was going to a record outlet or even a department store and buying a single. You'd buy one song that you really liked from the radio and you'd take it home and you'd play it endlessly until you had enough money to go buy another single.
My radio station had a feature in the evenings called Name It and Claim It. And they played this thing. It was name it and claim it. And they played the song. If you could name it, and that's what I won. I won a 45 RPM record of Al Wilson and the Snake because I mean, talk about nobody knows what I'm talking about here, but it was a thrill to win a 45.
Sure, absolutely, it would have been, and I can still remember some of the first 45s that I purchased. I probably still have them. We're talking, sort of late 70s at this point, when I would have been old enough to go to a record store and buy a 45 single. But I probably still have them somewhere, and those are songs that you never forget, because you just played them over and over again because you didn't have a massive record collection.
That's it. I still have them too, by the way. I have them on display in my bookshelf, and my mom saved my original 45 RPM record holder too, so I have that. But nevertheless, moving on before I go too deep into this, one of my favorite artists of all time, one of the great talents of all time, Marvin Gaye. Why is he in This Week in Music History this week?
Well, April 1st, we pay tribute to Marvin, who we lost tragically in 1984. It was a horrible incident where he was actually murdered in cold blood by his father in their family home just the day before he turned 45 years old. Marvin Gaye's birthday is April 2nd, and he was shot to death on April 1st, 1984. Some speculation as to how that argument happened. They were fighting over a phone bill. They were fighting over mislaid insurance documents. Marvin was home fighting an addiction to cocaine, which he was trying to kick at the time. So, it was never really determined what the cause of the argument was. But his father admitted to shooting him and went to prison for it. And sadly, the world still mourns the loss of Marvin Gaye. I mean, he had incredible success in the 60s and the 70s, was probably Motown's top recording artist. What's Going On, the LP from 1971, is still generally, when any magazine or publication does a list of, the top 100 most influential albums of all time, What's Going On is almost always on the top 100, if not in the top 20. It was extremely big. So, yeah, it's sad. It's a sad day for sure, but we remember Marvin for his talent and all the great music that he left behind.
I remember 1972, Mercy, Mercy Me, The Ecology. And who else was singing about The Ecology in 1972?
Right?
Really?
And Marvin was ahead of the curve for sure. He was putting ideas into his songs, about equality and about race relations and about ecology and things like that before a lot of artists would even go to those places. So another great thing about Marvin Gaye that we miss.
Barely scratching the record surface here. There's much more to come here on This Week in Music History with Brian Allison, our musicologist guest. More in a moment. This is 570 News Radio. I'm Larry Fedoruk, in for Mike Farwell, and this topic, This Week in Music History, the regular Monday segment, is we should just stay on till 1 o'clock talking about this stuff. I could do it forever. And our guest, Brian Allison, musicologist, can obviously do that as well. Follow his page on Facebook, This Week in Music History. And Brian, I guess only This Week in Music History would tie the names Bay City Rollers and Jim Morrison into the same paragraph. Otherwise, I can't see those two names connected. But tell me about that.
Well, they hit the news in the same week, by coincidence only. Yeah. So 75 was when the Bay City Rollers hit their first number one spot in the UK with a version of the Four Seasons song "Bye Bye Baby," and that would go on to create an entire mania around the Bay City Rollers, which didn't last too long, a couple of years, and then they sort of had their time, and that was it. But they did have a time in history for sure where they were definitely the thing. 69, going back to April 3rd, 1969, was the day Jim Morrison turned himself into the FBI because he was wanted on charges of lewd behavior and public exposure. So quite a trial ensued following this. Jim had allegedly exposed himself during a concert in Florida in 1969, and he was released on bail and went ahead with the trial, and he was actually found guilty and was sentenced to 6 months in prison and a $500 fine. He was appealing that when he went to Paris, left the United States, mostly because of the pressure of this trial, and then mysteriously died in the bathtub in July 1971 in Paris. So the result of that trial never resulted in him being imprisoned, but In 2010, actually, Florida Governor Charlie Crist posthumously pardoned Jim Morrison for that offense. So
I did not know that. Wow.
they did
Okay.
many years later. I think public pressure was kind of like, the trial
Right.
was interesting because it never actually revealed any proof that he'd exposed himself. There was a stack of pictures, a foot high that people had taken, and not one contained any picture of him exposing himself. But there were some witnesses who admitted to be under the influence of drugs who said he did. So it was a he said, she said event, and it eventually went away. But of course, sadly, we lost Jim Morrison.
Is it correct that ABBA, I had to reread your note a couple times, that ABBA once owned KISS, so to speak?
Well, they own the publishing rights and names and likenesses to KISS now. Now, not ABBA, but ABBA's company, which is called Pop House. So Pop House is a company that Bjorn Ulvaeus from ABBA owns, and they purchased the rights to KISS just in the last year, in 2024. So they own the likenesses of those characters. They own the name, the songs, and they're now planning a virtual KISS experience, much like ABBA Voyage, which has been a huge thing in Europe. And they're planning to open that in 2027. So yeah, they purchased the rights to all of KISS's songs and their likenesses for $300 million.
Wow.
So made Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley even wealthier than they already were.
Yeah, I guess. And probably even at that, a good investment. When you hear of these people selling their catalogs for $500 million and more, but yet people are willing to pay. Before we run out of time, Duran Duran on the radar for this week in music history?
Yes, April 5th, 1975, Duran Duran made their live debut in Birmingham, England, at a Polytechnic Institute. So that was kind of a big deal because, of course, Duran Duran went on to be a massive, massive band in the 80s. They were darlings of MTV with their fancy videos and poppy songs, and would go on to sell about 100 million albums worldwide, which was pretty impressive. They charted 21 songs in the top 100, and it all started in 1979 with a tiny show in front of a few hundred kids at a Polytechnical Institute in their hometown in Birmingham, UK. Wow. So, yeah, they got their start then. And are still around today. Duran Duran's still a touring band and still pleasing audiences globally.
Talk about a mania that surrounded a band. That was one of them, Duran Duran. And just before we go, do we have time to get in some birthdays and obituaries, Sandley?
Oh, for sure. So there's some big ones this week. So March 30th, Eric Clapton turning 80 years old. Eric's 80 now. Celine Dion turning 57 this week. A lot of people don't know this about Eric Clapton, too. He has a special tie to Canada. Did you know that Eric was half Canadian?
No, I've never known that, really.
He really is. So his mother he had a child with a Canadian soldier who was stationed in the UK, and that turned out to be Eric Clapton. He's written about it in his book. His father was a Canadian soldier. So Eric Clapton is half Canadian. We can claim half of Eric Clapton, which is kind of cool. We also say happy birthday today to Shirley Jones, a.k.a. Mrs. Partridge on the Partridge Family, turning 91 today. Angus Young, of course, the very energetic lead guitar player for AC/DC, turning 70 today. Pretty cool.
Wow.
And then, I mean, there's certainly some people that we've said goodbye to in this week in music history. Bill Withers died in 2020 at 81. And Rob Pilatus, who was half of Milli Vanilli, who Mike and I talked about last week, he died on April 2nd, 1998 at age 32. Sarah Vaughan passed away in 1990 at 66. And, of course, probably the most major one, on April 5th, we lost Kurt Cobain of Nirvana in 1994 at age 27, which was a watershed moment in music for sure.
I was mentioning Richard Chamberlain would have turned 91 today as well. He was Dr. Kildare on TV, but he had a record out in 62 that had some hits.
He did. Yeah. Did you know, here's a little piece of tidbit for you. The theme from Dr. Kildare, which Richard Chamberlain sings and recorded, peaked, its highest chart position was here in Canada. It peaked at number 4 in 1962, the theme from Dr. Kildare, which was actually called 3 Stars Will Shine Tonight. So if you remember that TV show back from the early 60s, he sang the theme song, and it charted the highest here in Canada at number 4. And then he recorded some some cover versions. You mentioned "Love Me Tender." That was one.
Right.
All I Have to Do Is Dream, which was an Everly Brothers song. He recorded
Right.
that and charted as well, and there was a few other ones along the way. So yeah, he had a little bit of a recording career there. And if you go onto Apple Tunes or some of those downloadable sites and search Richard Chamberlain, you can find some of his music there. They've uploaded it for you.
Brian Allison, This Week in Music History, the Facebook page, This Week in Music History. Search that on Facebook and follow Brian. Amazing. I enjoyed that. Thank you so much, sir.
I enjoyed talking to you too, Larry. Hopefully we'll get to do it again.
You bet. Brian Allison for This Week in Music History on 570 News Radio. I'm Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell, and we just had Brian Allison on with This Week in Music History. So much there that I'm going to take away. I think the biggest one that he mentioned was on this date in 1949, RCA introduced the 45 RPM record because my mom saved my 45s and gave them to me a few years ago, and I'm or not maybe all of them. I maybe had more, but at least 20 or so. And the rack that I saved them in, I have it, and it's quite a little piece in the office here. Just some great memories of the 45s, and you had a collection. That's the difference I always say between digital, whether they be movies or music, whatever, and the time when you had records and DVDs and things. You had a collection of things. Whereas, they weren't just files on your phone or your desktop, laptop. Nevertheless, we'll move on to modern times with Drewe's views. David Drewe coming up next, 570 News Radio.
Has anybody heard from Crazy Dave? Has anybody heard from Crazy Dave? Has anybody heard from Crazy Dave? Now that cat couldn't spell to win a bet, but he carried this battered notebook full of his poetry. More soul per square word than the Lord's Prayer. He was the kind of guy that called a spade a shovel, and a violin a fiddle, and a lady ma'am. And I don't even know why I think of him now. Maybe because he never told me a lie he'd have to apologize for later. Because he'd speak to a guy straight, eyeball to bloodshot eyeball, like he'd never even had a secret.
Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell, and that means it's time for Drewe's Views with the owner and principal at Negotiating Change, David Drewe. David, good to hear you and see you again.
It's been a while.
It has been. But there's much to talk about today, so let's get on. First of all, we're in the middle, or are we in the middle? Where are we on a trade war? And is there a win and lose here?
I don't remember what exactly the years were at the beginning of World War II, where they called it the phony war because the wars had been declared, but nothing was really, really happening yet. That sort of feels like where we are at right now, in that it just keeps getting pushed further and further and further away. And the consequences of the auto tariffs, especially, my reading of it seems to be that it's not going to be that bad at all, because it's going to apply to parts that are outside the free trade agreement. And I don't know how many auto parts we are dealing with outside the free trade agreement, other than perhaps maybe there's some that come from Mexico or overseas through. But I can't imagine it's a big quantity at all. So this could be a mountain in a molehill. But, on the other hand, Donald Trump might roll over, see his shadow, and change his mind.
There are pundits who say they're convinced he doesn't know what he's going to do when he gets up in the morning. He decides after he wakes up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, after the coffee kicks in and after somebody gets him angry about something or calms him down, he's rather mercurial, let's say.
Now, I also heard about auto parts that if you get parts from where you get parts, and in order to retool and rebuild, it's years. It's 2-3 years easily before.
Well, the idea of can we win the trade war? Yeah, absolutely we can. But it's not like that, because, it takes years. But in the meantime, we're not getting investment because the money's sitting on hold. And so we're already losing. Okay. But if this keeps going, their economy is 10 times ours. If it really comes down to it, they can squish us, but they don't want to. They don't have the will among the people to take the sacrifice to do that, whereas Donald Trump has made this existential for us. Like Mark Carney said, he wants to break us so the U.S. can own us. This is scary for us. We can win this trade war because we have more at stake. If this was a breakfast, they would be the chicken laying the eggs. We would be the pig providing the bacon. We have a lot more at stake here, so we are willing to fight a lot harder. We can win this war because we have the commitment, because we are existentially threatened.
But it forces us to focus on a never 51, which is something we'll never do, instead of things that we should be doing. Do you know what I mean? It's a negative versus a positive outlook.
Well, but even the tariffs, just the threat of the tariffs and everything else like that, it's existential to us. They want to put what started off as 50% tariffs on steel. They have our attention and we are afraid. Therefore, we are willing to fight. It takes a lot to get our dander up, but apparently our very existence is something that will get us paying attention.
Well, and we talked about this earlier with the poli-sci professor. The top issue in the Canadian election is a foreign policy. If you think about it, it's how to deal with Trump. It's one of our top election issues.
Absolutely. But after the election, then what?
Yes. Right.
And we'll see how it goes then. But yeah, it's a top election issue right now. But really, if you think about it, have we really had much differentiation among the parties on dealing with Trump? I don't see it. Really, we're looking at the leadership they will provide and transferring that into their ability to deal with Trump. But nobody's put anything on the table that says, here's why.
Now, speaking of our election, you were or had a take or a look at a battle of strategists, if I'm understanding, between kind of Tenike and Byrne, who are conservative strategists?
Yeah, if you look at the Ontario government and the federal government, there are literally billions and billions of dollars at stake for businesses. And credibility in attracting these businesses as clients goes a long way. Who has the inside track? So this entire fight going on between Ford and Poilievre not supporting each other and this bit of distance, I think it's more about the people who were around them and Corey Tenike's business future and Jenny Byrne's business future and which one of them wants to be the leading voice in conservatism.
I don't know that much about Jenny Byrne. I know that Corey Tenike has been around since Harper, probably before.
Yes, Jenny Byrne as well. I would say that Jenny Byrne is much more known for sharp elbows publicly. Aaron O'Toole, I forget who it was, who he congratulated on their retirement. And Jenny Byrne came out and said, this is everything that's wrong with you, congratulating some liberal on their retirement. Why didn't you criticize it for this, and this? Like, she just does not allow any moment to be classy. That's my love and disdain of Jenny Byrne.
I've always been fascinated at how well Doug Ford speaks or has spoken of Chrystia Freeland, of Justin Trudeau, and now of Mark Carney. I had a great conversation with the Prime Minister. They're doing such a great job. I don't know if that's always his voice, but publicly, oftentimes it is.
Oh, put it this way. I don't think he's disagreeing with what's going on, but you know what I mean? If you have staffers on both sides egging on the lack of respect going both ways, it's a lot easier for the leaders to do it as well. But on to the Mark Carney and Doug Ford, they had breakfast at one of Doug Ford's favorite diners. It was very notable that the location was there. It was one of those places where Doug Ford would be seen in the heartland of Ford Nation having dinner with Mark Carney. And we all know that there's all these voters who vote Liberal federally, or for Trudeau federally, and for Doug Ford provincially. Mark Carney's hoping to scoop them up.
Interesting always. David Drewe, Drew's Views, more in a moment. This is 570 News Radio. I'm Larry Fedoruk, in for Mike Farwell. Mondays at this time means it's Drew's Views with David Drewe, owner and principal at Negotiating Change. The question you posed, should a inappropriate sense of humor finish it for me. Should that cancel somebody, I guess?
Yeah. And it's not really a question, should it be disqualifying? Well, that's always in the eye of the beholder, obviously. But in this case, I think the beholder is the Liberal Party whose brand he is running on. And the question for them is, should his inappropriate, horribly inappropriate alleged joke be disqualifying? I don't have a solid answer for it. I can imagine that, in the wake of the foreign interference inquiry, a whole lot of our communities are going to be less accepting of that answer than I can be with my white privilege. But it's an interesting question. Sorry, go ahead.
This is, just for people to know, this is Paul Chang, who made the joke about collecting on the Chinese bounty by turning in these candidates.
By kidnapping.
Kidnapping, right. Yeah, I guess that is it.
And extraditing his conservative opponent.
Right.
So, you talk about the $1 million bounty, but, that was in Hong Kong dollars. It works out to like $125,000 in Canadian dollars. So it's not, especially when you consider the shipping costs, it's not that profitable a bounty, really. So I understand that some members of the Chinese expatriate community are not taking this as a bad joke. They are taking this as a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Like I say, I can't argue with them. They know better. But even as a joke, in this environment, I do not understand. Mark Carney has time to replace this guy. It's not like he's stuck with no replacement if. Right. Why would you keep this baggage? I would cut it off. But, again, it's not me.
Drewe's View says, to regain relevance, we need less sun from the sunshine list. What do you mean by that?
What's $100,000 nowadays?
Yeah.
Like, honestly, the Sunshine List used to be showing where the big money was going. And I'm sorry, if you're earning $100,000 a year, you're not saving it for a down payment on a house. Is that really still the appropriate threshold after 30 some years of inflation? Isn't it time we move the yardstick so it's actually worth our attention? Because right now at $100,000, it's just like, especially in a town like UW or KW, where between the cities, the universities, all the mush sector, everybody knows what everybody's earning basically because the bar is so low. Like, make it worthwhile again. That's all.
That's a great point. My son might be on it, depending on overtime, and he and his wife has a job, and they're a young couple struggling to pay a mortgage. And you're right. It's not, he's not on easy street.
Yeah, like the Sunshine List is not what it was meant to be, and now it's just because there's so many people on it. It's a joke so easy for some so-called data journalist to sit there, pump out some Excel stuff like it's supposed to mean something, when really, no, it's just a bunch of numbers that doesn't mean anything anymore.
That's a great point. Speaking of finance, you asked if the Toronto Star understood or had anyone that understood personal finance, and you talk about a Brookfield ownership or referencing Brookfield ownership. What got under, or what burr got under you there on that one?
Well, the Toronto Star started going after Pierre in one article last week. Alex Balingal started going after Pierre Poilievre as a hypocrite because apparently he owns shares in Brookfield. That does sound kind of hypocritical, except it's in a mutual fund. It's in an index mutual fund, even not even one of those ones where you are, investing in Canadian growth or whatever. It was just in a Canadian index fund that mirrored the stock market. There's a very huge difference between having an index fund that happens to have a sprinkling of shares of a Canadian company on the index than being an active owner with stock options and there's a difference. Absolutely. And the Toronto Star made the two equivalent, where it was like, Pierre Poilievre has gone over Mark Carney over Brookfield, but look at this. And it's like there's this big reveal and you're looking at the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain and it's like, there's nothing there. Why is this even getting the column inches that you gave it?
It's interesting because you're right. For people who don't know, the Brookfield criticism was against Carney because was he on the board or did he run Brookfield? That one I don't remember for sure, but he was criticized.
Yeah, he was running the board.
Right, okay.
And he put his name on the letter recommending that they move all the jobs from Canada to the U.S. and was not there when the jobs actually moved or the decision was made. So he was saying I had nothing to do with it. And then all of a sudden there's this letter he sent to all the shareholders saying, I encourage you to vote this way.
Right. So then Polyev criticized him for that. And the Star said, oh, well, look at Polyev. He has shares in Brookfield, which you've since explained.
Yeah, it's an index fund. Like, honestly, we all probably have some shares in Brookfield and don't know it. If you have any sort of mutual fund diversification, you are probably owning Brookfield just like you are probably owning Sun Life and a few banks.
Well, and that's the thing when you are invested in these kinds of things. I don't know how many people they look at the bottom line number. How's my fund performing? They don't necessarily break down everything that's in it. Most people, I guess.
Well, also, you get that very easily. You see the top 10 of this, the top 10 of this, the top 10 of this, but especially in an index fund, it's very easy to be significant and nowhere near the top 10.
David Drewe of Drewe's Views. Did I miss anything on the list?
Oh, geez. Have a great day, sir.
I think we got through it.
Are we early?
No, we're not early at all. We're on time. We're perfectly on time.
I'm going to rub Make's face in it next week.
Okay, sir. Thank you, David. David Drewe, Drewe's Views. David Drewe is owner and principal at Negotiating Change. This is 570 News Radio. Back in a moment. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. Mike's traveling with the Rangers. Again, great start. Great start, Rangers. On the first round of the playoffs, going 2-0 against Flint, and now the next two in Flint, of course. And just get her done. That's my thing. Get her done in Flint, and that'll be it. As Paul Fixter said, very hard to come back even from 2-0, never mind a 3-1, for example. But you got to win 4 out of the next 5. That's we put it that way. Like odds in favor. And I think it's just not the odds alone that favor the Rangers. But here we go. I don't follow the NHL as closely as I used to. Certainly, I tend to get more involved emotionally in the playoff period. But I am at least peripherally. I don't know. Are you following this? The Alexander Ovechkin chase of Wayne Gretzky's all-time career goal-scoring record, that he scored 890 last night, and he's got 5 goals. 5 goals to tie? Is it 4 to tie, 5 to? Well, see, this is why I'm not a sports guy. I told you I didn't follow, but it's right in that range. And they've got like 9 games to go in the season. If he doesn't do it, I would think he would come back next year, even for the number of games it would take him to beat the record, and then retire. I don't know that he's going to retire either way, this year or next year, or whether that's something, but I would think that that's something he would like to have as part of his career stats. Most goals scored in an NHL career. If you would ask somebody not in hockey who had that record, I'm sure most people would go, I don't know, is it Wayne Gretzky? And they'd be right. It's Wayne Gretzky. Some of his records have fallen by the wayside. But he owns so many of them, including this one, that would be untouchable, one would think, except all records, as athletes even say, all records are made to be broken. So Ovechkin could break this one. It's interesting. It's interesting to me. They've played about the same amount of time. I looked this up, 20 years and some months or something. They're both careers are about the same in length. So there's no asterisk, not that there would be one, but there might be one in the minds of fans who would say, yeah, but this guy played so much longer. This guy. No, they're about equal. So if he breaks the record, good for him. The funny thing about the two players right now, to me, and not to tie sports into politics, but let's face it, today we tie politics into everything, is that Gretzky has become somewhat of a Trump favorite, something he doesn't necessarily shun. There was a movement to rename Wayne Gretzky Drive in Edmonton, and some people don't appreciate the fact that he and Janet got invited to the inauguration and they're regulars at Mar-a-Lago. Although apparently at Mar-a-Lago they have a nice suite, but they have to share a bathroom with classified documents. This is what I've heard. I don't know if it's true. So there's Gretzky, who's become a bit of a Trumpian figure. Trump says, Canada, 51st state, and the governor should be Wayne Gretzky. And Gretzky, in his way, just kind of smiles this off. He doesn't take a stand on it, really. But so we have that record, NHL record, held by now a expat Canadian Trumpian figure, and soon to be taken over by a Vladimir Putin lover, Russian, Alexander Ovechkin. There's your politics-free National Hockey League. There's a guy, Ovechkin, said that even if the NHL bans me, I'm going to go play for Russia when it comes to international events. He loves the motherland and is loyal to Putin. So, who do you want to hold that record? Does it matter, or can you just say, well, we're putting politics aside and we'll just be fans of hockey and that's it? But kind of following Ovechkin a little bit. See if he's going to break that record this year or early next. What do you think about it? What do you think about it in general? Because I tell you, it's your time next from noon to 1 every weekday on the Mike Farwell Show. It's the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. All on you, your rants and raves, your smiles and your frowns, and everything in between. The 12 o'clock Talkback Hour is next on 570 News Radio.
Take out the papers and the trash, or you don't get no spending cash. If you don't scrub that kitchen floor, you ain't gonna rock and roll no more. Yakety yak.
Don't talk back.
Just finish cleaning up your room.
You talk back on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. It's all you. You know how it works. 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. It's open phones, open lines, free phones Monday, free phones every day between noon and 1. Rant or rave, whatever you like, whatever's on your mind, topics that we've discussed, topics that we haven't discussed, something you think should be discussed, or, just something you want to say. You get the picture. It is the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. And, of course, it's 519-570-2545, 1-800-570-5715, or star 570 on your mobile. And here we have Grant. Grant, go ahead. You're on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour.
Yeah, did you watch 60 Minutes last night where they released, or where they were talking to
I did not, so I can't help you, but go ahead.
Yeah, a hostage was released from I guess I can't remember where it was, but who puts ceasefires into place? Is that Donald Trump?
Well, I mean, I think if you're talking about Israel and Hamas, the ceasefire was agreed to by Hamas and Israel. You need two sides to agree to a ceasefire. It might have been Trump and that administration helped negotiate it, but no, it has to be Israel and Hamas that initiated the ceasefire.
And cannot Donald Trump push it to? Can he not accelerate this thing to say, you know what, we're not going to piss around for 10 days. We want this now. Can he not? He's the president.
Yeah.
Can he not? Sorry?
Yes. I mean, he can say that. And I don't know. I mean, America has a lot of influence in international politics and international affairs, but at the end of the day, it has to be the nation. It could be Israel or Hamas, for that matter, who go, okay, we just can't agree to this one point, so it's all off the board. So,
well, I think Donald Trump needs to forget about his stupid tariffs and start putting his foot down of saying, we want this ceasefire now. If I'm
if I'm a hostage that has just been released, I'm going to kick his head in because he's piddling around with these stupid tariffs when he should be looking after his people, get these people out of there. Like common sense says, if they're not willing to do it themselves, then you're the president, you get your butt into gear and you start doing your job. Enough of this crap of the tariffs. Clearly, his head's up his behind. He doesn't give a damn about the people. Enough of the tariffs. Look after these people, for crying out loud.
All right, Grant, thanks for the call, man. Well said. I listen. The other problem with that is, the world in general has had problems with the United States putting their foot down. And a lot of the world is going, United States, stay out of our business, stay out of our affairs. So there is that. And how do you put your foot down? What do you do? Do you send in military? I mean, not that the U.S. hasn't in various situations. I mean, they just bombed the Houthis in Yemen. But I'm saying I don't know that it's if it were it be that simple, I guess is what I'm saying. Mark, go ahead. You're on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. Mark, there we go.
You've got a bunch of 45s.
I have probably 40 or 50 left. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got about 40 of them. And they date back to the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I just find that interesting, Larry.
I don't even have a record player. You can still go out and buy a turntable or even a little record player. I remember one time Indigo used to sell these little portable record players for nostalgia. And I was going to buy one. I don't, so I just have them for nostalgia.
Yeah, I'm glad you didn't put those out with your albums out to the curb that one day.
Oh, the album story, right?
Yes.
I know.
Okay, Larry, thanks. Have a great day.
You too, Mark. Yeah, I don't play the 45s, although when I didn't really keep them. My mom kept them. My mom, bless her, and bless her memory, has kept a lot of stuff. If you emptied out her storage room, it would be a museum of my brothers and my lives. She kept a lot of stuff, and it's great. If, as parents, you can do that just for that moment when your adult child opens up a box and goes, oh, wow, this is from when I was a kid. Oh, wow, I forgot about this thing. And she kept a lot of that. And the 45s, I got them many years ago. She gave them to me. And I've kept them around, like I say, not play them. I took about, I think it's 8 or 10 of them. And the cool ones that I had, like Beatles and some Motown and stuff. And I made a little frame. I mounted them and framed them. And it still hangs in my living room as a little display. And I knew that once I glued them and mounted them that I had basically destroyed that 45. Like, it's just a visual now. It's got no collectability or playability anymore because there's glue on one side of it. But I did that, and so I have that, and then I have the ones that I have just in a rack that are kind of fun. And the reason we mentioned that, if you missed it, back on This Week in Music History, Brian Allison mentioned that it was on this day in 1949 that RCA introduced the very first 45 RPM record. So that's why we were reminiscing about 45 RPM records. And when I was at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland years ago, the T-shirt that I did buy has the 45 center. You know, those little plastic centers. I don't know if they ever had a name. That it's got a picture of it on the front of the T-shirt. That's the T-shirt I chose to buy. Here's Mike. Mike, you're on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. Go ahead.
Hi, Larry. How are you today?
I'm not bad, Mike.
I'd like to talk about two things, your record collection and the Paul Chang thing down in Toronto. Not only do I have 45s, but I also have 78s from my grandparents.
Oh, wow.
And 33s, 45s, 78s, and stuff like that. They are from the 1940s and 50s, early 1950s, and then we have things like Nat King Cole and stuff like that going forward. So I do have I have 2 or 3 turntables, right? One only plays 33 and 45. The other two play 33, 45, and 78. So I still play them once in a while. It's good to hear those voices and stuff like that from way back in the 40s and 50s. Now on this Paul Chang thing.
Okay.
I think Mark Carney needs to fire him as a candidate. What he did is atrocious and egregious and a whole bunch of other adjectives. You do not threaten another person by encouraging people to take him to the Chinese consulate or embassy to be arrested. That is totally unacceptable. And I think Mark Carney needs to show, in this example, he needs to show that he will hold people accountable. It is totally unacceptable to make that kind of threat. And if I were Mark Carney, I would tell Mr. Chang that the RCMP and CSIS will be investigating him, and he's fired as a candidate. So that's my thoughts, Larry.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate the call. I think it would actually help Mark Carney to do that. I think it would just help. He's leading in the polls. You know, people seem to like him as a leader. Show some leadership in saying we don't put up with this kind of thing here at the Liberal Party. I think it would help him. So I agree with Mike in that sense. Kyle, Dave, you're next. We're going to do a short break, and then we'll get to more of your calls. 12 o'clock Talkback Hour here on 570 News Radio. I'm Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell. 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. Again, 519-570-2545, 1-800-570-5715, or star 570 on your cell. Those are numbers you should have programmed into your phone on your speed dials, etc. Here is Dave. Dave, go ahead. You're on 570 News Radio.
Good afternoon. I have two comments on your earlier segments. And the first one is, as your earlier caller, I have a 78, 178. And then I have a few 33 and a thirds. And then a number of 45s. So these were originally bought 45s that I still have. So that's that.
Nice.
On records. And then on the second subject is on Richard Chamberlain. And
yes,
I remember at the time, now the records may prove otherwise, but I thought I remembered in my day that Dr. Kildare and ER ran briefly at the same time. That's my memory. Now, I could be wrong because I know Dr. Kildare was really early. So, but anyway, I watched Dr. Kildare, and then it went off the air, and then I got on, I was watching ER, and I stuck with ER and watched it right to the end. So I really loved both those shows. Also, on the Thornbirds, I really loved the TV series, The Thornbirds. And I turned around, and surprisingly, I got my young niece hooked on it. And she ended up buying the book. And then I asked her one day if I could borrow it to read the book. And she told me I could have it, so I've kept it since. Because she she bought it once and then didn't bother reading it anymore. But I started reading it again, so I still have the book. So I really liked Richard Chamberlain, and I respected him as an actor, and loved his career and everything. So that's
all right. Cool, Dave. Great call. Thank you, sir. I don't know that what universe where ER and Dr. Kildare could have existed together, except that I'm thinking now, did they reboot Dr. Kildare? Was there, just like they rebooted Hawaii Five-0 a couple of years ago and these kinds of shows that they reboot, did they reboot Dr. Kildare with somebody else? I'm not sure. Richard Chamberlain passed on Saturday. He was 90 years old. He would have been 91 today. And I mentioned him earlier just to give you some context of why Richard Chamberlain has come up. And he was the young Dr. Kildare on TV is how people came to know him. And then he was king of the miniseries, among them being the Thornbirds that he started. And so there's just to back up, if you missed the earlier part of the show, that's the references that Dave was referring to. Great call, Dave. Appreciate it. Here's Kyle. Kyle, go ahead.
Well, I have a bunch of records. I mean, I never bought them. I was lucky enough to inherit them from my dad because he's just like, do you want these? And I was like, sure, I'll take them. And there's probably, I counted them, there's 125 records from his university days that I got to pick up. And there's a couple of them that are, I think he had when I was a kid, like Sesame Street, and I think there's the Sheriff Wilson Bram as a record player back in the day, or as a record back in the day that I have. So the only thing that I would say that's harder to buy now besides records is actually finding a decent record machine. I mean, the new ones that they have, I don't know if I didn't do my research enough or whatever, but the record player that I found, I couldn't even hook up speakers to it. So now I bought a whole new one because I would like to get like those old 1970s, 1980s, decks that have all like the cassettes and the CDs and got your, like the massive speakers and stuff. I wish I had that old school setup, like my parents and stuff, where they had like the JBL and things like that. But yeah, no, I think I just want to touch on that I think, records nowadays, I still go record shopping. I think it's something that I have, and I would never, like in my lifetime, never get rid of records. I mean, I hear some horror stories where people got rid of theirs and they regret it. I would never do that because I listen to mine all the time, man. So anyways,
nice.
Thanks a lot. Yep.
Cool. Kyle, thank you. And we were talking about records. Like, if you don't know, records were played at 33 1/3, 33, which was the albums, the 45 singles, which were introduced today on this date in 1949, according to our musicologist, Brian Allison. And then the 78s were the old technology before that. But the thing that tripped me when all this conversation was talking about record player was two things. One, as a kid, sometimes you'd play your 45s at 78, or you'd play your albums at 45 just to speed them up and have a laugh. Sounded like, the Chipmunks or whatever. People don't even know what I mean by the Chipmunks, but it was like, that was fun. And secondly is, I remember the first time I heard this line, somebody said, hey man, if you were born in 1933, you turned 45 in 78. And it's true, right? And you're like, wow, you just blew my mind, man. There's the record speeds. That's the saying I remember. If you were born in 33, you turned 45 in 78. There's something to that, huh? No, there isn't. All right. More of your calls, 12 o'clock Talkback Hour in a moment on 570 News Radio. Be part of our remaining half hour coming up here on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. Larry Fedoruk in for Mike Farwell today. If you want to get set up for our next half hour, by all means, call 519-570-2545, 1-800-570-5715. This toll-free, star 570 on your cell. Throughout the show today, we've talked about a lot of things. We talked about the consumption and treatment centers being allowed to reopen, but mostly cannot because of funding. We talked about election burnout and our campaign. We talked about the new KW Oktoberfest with the new president, Chef D. I mean, we talked a lot about a lot of things. Drewe's Views covered a lot of topics, including the election campaign. It's that or something else on your mind. Give us a call. It's all about your opinions, your thoughts, your calls on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. More in a moment. This is 570 News Radio. Let's get some more of your calls on this 12 o'clock Talkback Hour. Here's Imran. Imran, go ahead, sir.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I just have I have one question for you. You can answer me yes or no if it is possible. Like, my question is, did you see during the time of former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, any of the influential MPs or cabinet member they stood up and say that against any policies of Justin Trudeau, like this policy is not good or this policy should be changed? Or did you see in the recent years?
I'm thinking no.
Okay, that's good. That's my expectation was no. But did you see that after Justin Trudeau resigned or around that time, the influential MPs or members was saying that some policies doesn't go in their thought, like or in their mindset, and it should be changed. Did you see that?
Okay, I'm going yes on that.
Yes. So that's my answer too. So my question is, how can you trust those MPs or those cabinet members, those who are flip-flopping? How can you trust them that they're saying the right thing now? Because the same members was supporting his policies for the last 10, 12 years, maybe 10 years, and now they're saying, for example, carbon tax or capital gain tax, those are not good policies. So why don't they stood up? And that they took like 10 years to understand. So this is a question to me, like, how can you now rely on them to run another 4 years? But how can they stood up against or for the people of the Canada? Like, that is my comments, and I hope Canadians will make the right decision in this election, right. Whether we will go forward or move backward. That's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Imran. And that's a fair question. Although these kinds of questions that you would ask of the policies and voicing your disagreements are never supposed to be outside of the caucus room, right? That's not just a Justin Trudeau government. That's every party in a democratic system. You fight your battles behind closed doors and then walk out and offer a unified voice, right? And if you've got to, bite your tongue a little bit to do it, you do it. You toe the party line. Good or bad? Well, I don't know. But that's the way it works. So I think you always have to question that. And then as of course the leadership starts to crumble a little bit and you go, maybe we should have somebody else, then suddenly people aren't afraid to be vocal outside of the caucus room, outside of the party meetings. So I think that's what happened. As far as the question of, well, how do you believe them now, or do you trust them? I think that's a fair question. Here's Ian. Ian, go ahead.
Hey, Larry, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. I'm on my way home driving from Mexico, and I actually happen to be between Memphis and Nashville right now. So I found it interesting listening to your musicologist and talking about records. And I thought, hey, I'm in the perfect area for this. So
wow, Memphis, you bet, man.
Yeah. So, anyways, I find it interesting. Growing up as a kid, my first record was Supertramp Breakfast in America, and I was 9 years old. And to be honest, I started music lessons, and it was one of those things that as a kid I don't know that I quite got it, but when I turned 11, I put it back on, and I was like, whoa, this is amazing. And the one thing about records that I love is how many times when you heard about the new record coming out, you would get together with your friends, you'd have an evening where you would actually put the needle down, and you just sit and listen, and you just take it all in. Today, with all our digital technology and everything else, it's not the same. It's not the same social aspect that we have anymore, which is kind of sad. Because I think, when you put that needle down, you were forced to listen to the songs and really listen. And I think you forgot about the rest of the world. And, I'm coming back. It's amazing. When I went to Mexico, I had just crossed the border and heard about Trudeau resigning. And here I am now going through the States and hearing about all the tariffs and the election now and everything else. So maybe my point is this, everyone just, whether it's a record or whether it's digital media, whatever, put on your favorite album, get a nice drink, sit back for a good, 45 minutes to an hour, and just listen and get rid of the rest of the junk in the world and just enjoy it.
All right.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thanks,
I agree. And thanks, man. Great call. And wins the location of the day call too. Just driving right now in the Memphis region. Memphis. Elvis always said Memphis. Remember? The thing too about those sort of called listening parties was that you passed the album jacket around and everybody got a shot at reading the liner notes. Sometimes there would be lyrics, and it was back to this. You had a physical item in your hands, and I don't know. I've never actually researched the importance of that as opposed to a digital file that, you can look at your screen and there might be some pictures of the artist, or there might be, you could find lyrics and do the thing too. So it's not just a digital file, but mostly that's what it is. Where this thing you had that took up space on your shelf, these records, meant something different somehow. This tangible, tactile. I'm not sure if we go on that, but just going back and listening to your favorite music for 45 minutes and shutting the world out, that's not bad. I like that, Ian. Dylan, go ahead, Dylan.
Hey, Larry, calling about the closure of the CTS site in Kitchener. Hearing about that this morning, I found myself a little conflicted, maybe a little bit of guilt on my part because, I agree with it closing. I understand the grips that addiction has on some people, and obviously what can happen to the people that are using these street drugs. But I can't think of any other addiction or mental problem where the fix or the way to handle it is just to supervise the person while they're doing it. Over the last couple of years, I've heard coming out of the CTS, we've saved this many from overdose, but I haven't heard any statistics on how many people have gotten out of the lifestyle due to the treatment act, the part of the acronym. So it kind of seems like all it was doing was supervising addicts. And like I said, I don't think that's the right approach. Saying that, I do feel for the people that are, currently addicted and going through that. So anyways, like I said, I just wanted to call and say I do feel some confliction and a little bit of guilt for agreeing with the closure of the site. That's about it.
Thank you, Dylan. I don't think you're the only one, man. I don't think you're the only conflicted person. I don't, some people look at these, what we used to call safe injection sites as, a safe place to do your drugs so that you can die another day under somebody else's watch. Harsh, but, was that it? Where we're just prolonging your inevitability of you being consumed by your drug addiction? The treatment, but I think empathetically, it's like, okay, it's not just because you're on drugs, it's because there's really bad drugs out there and bad mixtures of drugs. And they're not just illicit, they're deadly beyond the fact of lifelong drug addiction, they're deadly. So let's have a place where we can keep you alive until treatment, but then we don't put enough money in treatment. So, and I get that, and nobody wants it in their backyard. Nobody wants it around the corner or near a school or near a, so I think we're all conflicted because we all feel bad for people who have the addiction disease, but what are we doing for the treatment? I don't know that enough is being put out there. You talk about, because everybody will say, for example, fentanyl. How do you stop fentanyl? Because the drug lords will just move to another area and you invade this country and then they'll move next door and they're multi-billion-dollar corporations being run by people who know what they're doing. How do you stop them? And that's why you get rid of the demand. In other words, if nobody wanted fentanyl, they'd be out of business. True. So that's where the treatment part comes in, as Dylan said. But feeling conflicted, man, that's a lot of people, I think, feel that way. This is 570 News Radio, back with the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour in a moment. I'm Larry Fedoruk in from Mike Farwell. A couple of quick observations on the election campaign right now. And you're going to say, Larry, what does that have to do with the candidates themselves, their feasibility, their electability, their worth. What does this have to do with the issues? Nothing. Oh, I know nothing. But you know that political strategists talk about this, and this is planned and involved. Number one, do you ever notice how now everybody is standing in front of people who wear reflective vests and hard hats? That's the Doug Ford playbook, by the way. That's where Doug Ford will never be caught dead cutting the ribbon at a university. Never. Not just because he's not allowed scissors. Because that's just not him. That's not his background. He wants behind him is the working man and woman, the working stiff. And what a working stiff, what better way to portray a working stiff than reflective vest, hard hat? It's almost as if you're not a working stiff unless you wear one of those. And if you wear one of those on your job, a vest and a hard hat, total respect, of course. I'm not saying. I'm just now you represent the working. So now Carney's in front of people, and Jagmeet Singh is in front of people. Everybody. You got to have some vests and hard hats before you're going to speak to people. Second observation, for Carney and Polyev, the podium is higher because they bring their own podiums. And the podium is in the color of the party, the blue, the red. And then sometimes it'll have the logo of the Liberals or the CPC. Sometimes it'll, have a slogan. Whatever slogan they're running on, it'll be on there. And the podium used to be about mid-chest area, low chest area. Now it's almost up at the shoulders because when you spend all this money on a podium to get on TV with your branding on it, TV used to just zoom in a little bit, and then a lot of TV news channels have scrolling on the bottom, So they spent all this money on the podium, and you couldn't read it on TV, so they moved it up higher. So now Carney and Polyev, they both look like guys who are like 5'3" trying to peek over a wall. It looks ridiculous. Jagmeet doesn't have a podium most times. He doesn't travel with a podium because you know how much those things cost. And let's face it, the funding is just. And also notice Jagmeet Singh. Remember when he got all that stuff about you're the NDP or for the people and all that stuff, yet you have this expensive watch and your expensive suits and your BMWs. He got accused of all that, remember? Notice on this campaign, Jagmeet Singh is not wearing a watch. He's not standing behind a podium, and he's mostly wearing a sweater. Just a working guy in a sweater. Believe me, that's all planned stuff. That's how ridiculous it is. The imagery, right? It's my observations, little subtleties to look for in this latest campaign. Let's get one more in before the break. Here's Ernie. Ernie, go ahead. You're on the 12 o'clock Talkback Hour.
Hey, Larry. Just some statements and potentially just see if I want to hear your thoughts after too. This goes to the safe injection site, and obviously the opioid crisis and the crime that we have in our country right now. Pierre, he's laid out his game plan. I'm not saying his answers or what he's going to say is going to work, but I'm pretty sure we can agree what we're doing right now isn't working at all. He wants to repeal the Liberal Bill C-75, which is the catch and release system, and repeat offenders ineligible for bail. Obviously, the safe supply, cancel that, put it towards treatment and treatment centers. Again, like I said, we were hearing it. We don't know if it's going to work. I've watched Liberal rallies. I've watched Pierre's rally. I have yet to hear Carney talk about crime or the opioid crisis at all. And I'm wondering, maybe I'm sure you follow him a bit more than what I do. Has he mentioned how he's going to fix any of these issues? Is it just going to be the same thing that we're seeing today? Are we just going to allow criminals to commit crimes and just let them out? Have we heard any stance from his side at all?
Not that I have heard, and I don't know that I pay more or less attention than others, but I have not heard it. And let's be honest, would it work at this point? It's sad to say it's just about what works. What works right now is for you to stand up there and talk about how you're going to defeat Trump and the tariffs and Canada Strong. You're not going to dive into the issues that we're concerned about, like crime, for example, or drug addiction. It's just not worth talking about right now, which is too bad.
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from there. I'm just like, it's on the minds of a lot of Canadians. And it comes, like Pierre mentions this and he talks about it every day. Carney's talking, obviously he's switching, and I understand it's strategical. But how do we not talk to Canadians on these major issues that are impacting a lot of lives? Like we're talking about these safe injection sites almost daily. We're talking about people just dying and laying on the streets. Larry, I think at least we need to have at least some questions from Carney about to see what his stance on this issue to at least get some Canadians thinking the other way. And like I said, I've tried to get him his stance or to hear if he's going to change anything, and I haven't heard anything yet. But it's just been crickets. But thanks, Larry. I just wanted to see what you thought and my point there.
No, great thoughts, Ernie. We're going to take a short break. Be back with more in a moment. This is 570 News Radio. Larry Fedorkin from Mike Farwell. Thank you for welcoming me in. Is that a word I just made up? Welcoming. There it is. Into the 570 News Radio family once again. Guest hosting here. Always enjoy it. Just back to Ernie's point on the call. I heard a pundit say recently that generally we're living through the results of previous policies. That's kind of our lives is governments and societies, we put in policies and things that we want to do, and then now we're living with the results, which aren't always the results we perceived would happen. And I think that's happened with sort of catch and release, consumption treatment sites, things like that. I think the intentions were great, and it just didn't work out that way. And now we need to move on. But again, also to Ernie's point, I don't think we're going to hear the politicians talk about it this time around, because it's not the winning speech that we want to hear in order to get votes out this time around. Although I hope as issues they don't go away. Nevertheless, as I said, Mike Farwell traveling with the team. He's back this week, and then I'll be back on Friday. Go Rangers go. In the meantime, next game tomorrow. This is 570 News Radio. We'll talk soon.